resistance doesn't exist. When a horse is behaving in a certain way, they're working on protecting themselves.
You're seeing the appearance of resistance as the expression of work needing to be done that's starting to tell a story.
Welcome back to Hacks for Horse People, our bonus series here on Dear Horse World. In this series, we bring together two experts to share their insights, tips, and wisdom to help you deepen your connection with horses and enrich your equestrian life. In today's episode, we're joined once again by Josh Nichol, a natural horsemanship expert, as he dives into conversation with Duey Freeman, a renowned equine and wilderness therapist. Together, they delve into the therapeutic relationship between horses and humans, exploring topics like vulnerability, attachment, and trauma in horse-based therapy and training contexts. They also discuss how horses, as prey animals, offer unique opportunities for personal growth and healing. Their conversation highlights the power of creating a supportive, non-judgmental environment for both humans and horses in clinics and therapy sessions. It's truly something. This is an inspiring and thought-provoking discussion you won't want to miss. Let's jump in. Here's Hacks for Horse People with Josh Nichol and Duey Freeman.
I have to tell you, Dewey, I've been really looking forward to spending time with you. I've gotten a chance to listen to some of your podcasts, and every time I've listened, it's drawn me more and more into being excited to spend time and see what you do. So this is something I've been really looking forward to doing.
Well, thank you. And actually, that's incredibly mutual.
Cool.
When Noelle first suggested that we connect this way, I was incredibly excited. I've had the chance to watch many of your videos, and also just this last couple of days of us connecting has been marvelous. It's been like a number one. Exciting and creative.
Yeah. I feel like for myself, I think there's going to be some bigger pieces that I'm excited to talk to you about.
Okay.
And then I think it's probably going to take its own flow as we go along. But
should I be nervous?
Oh, well, we'll find out. I'm not sure who should be nervous.
Okay, fair enough. We'll both be nervous together a little bit.
There we go. But one of the biggest pieces that I'm excited to share with you is trying to kind of find this middle with people working with horses, trainers working with horses and people, and then therapists working with horses and people. And this is really becoming a pretty big piece that we're having to spend time talking about. And I know for myself, as a trainer and a coach, an empowerer, I don't know what you want to call what I do, there's always this area where we're having to be very considerate of the vulnerability that it brings up in people. And I know from the therapy side, you're really working into those people, but then there's the training element. So it seems like
the training element with the horses?
Yeah, right.
Okay.
Right. And there's a real neat opportunity for the right kind of blend to make those things very empowering for people's growth and for horses. So I was just curious what your experience has been and how you've kind of gotten to a place where you're working with people and horses and how that's all come together.
You mean like sort of how I started this whole thing?
Sure.
About, trying to think now, like the mid 90s, I've actually been working with people since 1970 in one way or another. My steps into working with people was through Outward Bound. And I did lots and lots and lots of wilderness therapy and nature-based therapy. I was also fortunate enough to be involved with horses and riding lessons, and part of what I was finding was that the horses were incredibly healing to me, the relationships that I would have. And I was fortunate enough that my primary early riding instructor was pretty relational. And I essentially fell in love with horses and fell in love with my connection with horses and the healing power that they had. And part of what I found was when I started working with people and horses, I could get as far in 2 hours as I could in a week in wilderness programs.
What do you think what do you think the reason is for that?
So much, a big part of what happens in wilderness programs is the survival aspect, which is hugely important. But when we're working mostly on survival and can we get dinner done and can we sleep and be warm and can we stay out of the rain and floods and those kinds of things, that takes priority. And that would open up a whole lot in the clients that I was working with. What I found was in that work and through my early career was that every major emotional injury we had or have happens in relationship. And the only way through that is through being in healing relationships. Does that make sense to you?
Oh yeah, it's making my brain turn. There's where
well,
the
I can see this. It's like, this is perfect. Many people, especially since they've been harmed in relationships, human to human relationships, people want to be in relationships and want to heal. And many times what can happen is our relationship with horses can begin that healing, and with the idea of working together with horses as partners in healing, that then we can take that and help sort of transform or take the leap back into being in relationship with people.
Right.
Oftentimes, interestingly enough, some of that, and I don't know how many hundreds of times this has happened, is literally working with a person with a horse standing behind them, literally where the horse has their back. And that person is then working on relationship with whomever helped cause some harm in relationship to them. It might be a partner, it might be a parent, it might be another, a sibling. But what the horses actually hold and can hold a ground and attachment for people to be able then to step into other relationships and heal.
I think it's actually really crazy, because these animals, we can't talk to them. It's not like this gets set up.
Right. Yeah, we can't go up and talk to Mr. Ed.
That's
Mr.
right.
Ed doesn't talk.
Right.
It's a great TV show, but it's not really how it works.
Yeah, that's right. But yet, I think it's a real testament to how frequency-based and energy-based horses are in their communication, which I think is a whole world of conversation. And I think we're going to get into it a little bit as we go along. But I think that's just such a beautiful testament to the coolness of this animal, and that really what animals seem to find the most clarity in is coherent relationship, coherent situations.
Exactly.
And I've seen this in my own space, is that the more connected people become to anything, really, it could be sadness, it could be the frustration, it could be whatever, that the horses actually find stability in that, and they ground themselves. And it's almost like when we're trying to heal, having a horse get to a place like that creates that opportunity where they can almost feel like it's almost as if the horses were made to have some of that influence with people. Horses and people have evolved together for thousands of years. And there isn't human history without horses involved.
Correct.
And sometimes I wonder how that evolution has gone so much deeper than, just horses and people being around each other. But there's this amazing synergy that seems to almost go to a soul level of bringing us to be better creatures together.
Yeah, I'm in full agreement with you. I mean, there's daily I wake up and go, how do they do this? And how have we been fortunate enough to be able to be in relationship with horses? One of the pieces that I see, and this I think only touches on a little bit of what you're talking about, is in the wild, horses are prey animals.
Mm.
And many times in a lot of training that you do and other clinicians do, and through my career that I do, is how do we walk in and not be predatorial and be with, because if we're not predatorial, then horses don't have to be prey. Well, horses have actually figured out how to exist as prey animals and be safe because of relationship. Relationship with each other, relationship with herd, which translates to us being in relationship and community. When we have been severely harmed, whether it's through attachment issues, whether it's through trauma, many times we end up feeling like we're prey. And so our nervous systems are actually responding the exact same way that a horse's nervous system responds under stress and under predatorial processes. So what horses have done is figured out over time how to be solid, how to be congruent, which is what you're speaking about, how to be integrous, and how to be in relationship for protection. Because that's what protects horses. And I know horses can fight and horses can run really fast and all of those things. And the primary way they protect each other is through relationship. When we end up feeling like we're prey, and we can learn to begin to be non-predatorial and non-prey in relationship with horses, that is the underlying building block and foundational process for us to be able then to move into more authentic relationships. First, hopefully with our horses,
right,
and with our with other beings in the world. And one of the pieces that's been so nice over the last, and I don't know the right timing on this, I'd say last 2 to 3 decades, is that we have had major movement, and you might know this better than me, so major movement from dominating horses and putting them in, from predator-prey perspective and moving into much more relational perspective with horses.
Yeah, we're definitely in a tidal change.
Totally.
There's a transformative time where there's change. Something that, just over our conversations has really struck for me. And I really like to look at a lot of the learning or the way I exist as I look for universal threads. And universal threads are things that someone tells you and it's almost like, oh, that would exist here, or that makes sense for my wife and I, and that makes sense for how I would be with my horse. And it's almost like it spans out and you can just see how it would overlay in your whole life.
Right.
Because I feel like those are really the deeper universal truths that hit us. And my approach to, I guess, what I call relational horsemanship is it's just this idea of what does it mean to be in relationship with horses, to have leadership connections so that we can be at peace together, so they can move their body well, but then that we can do hard things together. And in the leadership side, it's really about meeting a horse's needs. And your work on attachments is so cool, because what I watch, a lot of what we would observe as horse behavior is actually horses that are going on with their needs not being met.
Right.
And that creates a degree of tension, which then creates a behavior. And so often, and you said this earlier, there's no such thing as tension or resistance. And I love that.
There's a difference between tension and resistance.
Right.
So I love your word tension.
Yeah. Right. Because they are two different things. But the idea that there is no such thing as resistance is very challenging, because I think for a lot of us in our training, we would say the horse is being resistant and is not wanting to do what we want. From a relational perspective, where a horse feels resistant is a tell for us. It starts to help us look into what's going on, what need isn't being met, which then can cause us, if we can navigate those waters right, to bring peace to an unmet need, rather than seeing that the horse needs to be dominated, a behavior needs to change, they need to be forced into doing this or that. And I think that's the biggest transformation. So what horses will do is they will end up, when they feel dysregulated or anxious about what's going on with a human, behaviors come up. And so then the idea is to recognize when a behavior comes up, there's something behind it.
Right.
And then to channel into that. I just love how you have done such a cool work on attachment. So what I watch with horses is horses have different needs and they'll attach in different ways, but they can almost become obsessed with whatever they've attached to. And then that blocks them from finding peace. So where I feel like a beautiful piece in my work as a horseman would be to be able to step into that horse's world and observe what they've attached to and bring peace to that, so they don't need to do it in a negative way, because behaviors are an expression of those negative attachments that they're trying to find self-preservation or peace, but they can't find it in that negative state. And then, watching what you did with Noelle yesterday, how you were able to navigate so quickly. And I feel like that's where I'm trying to find the art in myself, is to be able to navigate quickly to the center of why it appears that there's tension and be able to talk to that core element. And I watched you do that with Noelle yesterday. So I'd love for you to share. I know there's the idea of contact, and I'd love for you to share on that.
Yeah, I can share that
attachment, because these pieces just are so synergistic between what I look at as good horsemanship, but also unlocking what's in us that is somewhat behind the curtain. It's not really what's showing, but it is actually what's causing these things. And would you share a little bit on your idea of attachment?
So here's what's so cool about this for me. One is many of the things that you say actually dovetail, like we've known each other for 30 years and we've now known each other for 2 days or 2.5 days or something like that.
Maybe 2.5.
So that's one piece. The other piece that I see with you, and I want this to dovetail into responding to your question, is that so much of what I see you do comes from your heart and your soul and your gut. And one of the hard parts about what I see you do, and actually what I try to do, is many times it's really hard to put words to what we feel inside, and to explain what's happening inside. Does that make sense to you?
100%.
And it's like,
well, it's feelings.
Yeah, it's feelings.
Guidance.
It's a whole somatic process. It's a sharing of nervous systems between what's happening between two beings. And so part of what I would propose is that the sharing nervous systems between two beings is not just between two humans or two horses.
Agreed.
We clearly can share nervous systems between human and horse and human, and work with that. One of the things that is so difficult is to put all of this into words. One of the main, like you asked about attachment, one of the most difficult pieces with attachment is it's actually a relatively, if you look at the really big picture, it's a relatively complicated process. However, if you take pretty much every attachment theory in the world and boil it down, what it comes down to is being able to go through a hard time in contact, in relationship, and come out okay, which is exactly what you talk about.
Yeah.
And I don't know how many times you have spoken and said, well, let's work toward going through a hard time and coming out okay.
Right.
Or I think the wording you use is we can do hard things. I think that's the wording you use.
The phrase I use, yeah.
And so that's what we're talking about. And when it becomes predictable that we can go through a hard time in contact, in relationship, and come out okay, that's each of those moments of being able to do that both builds a foundation of attachment and strengthens that foundation.
Agreed.
Does that make sense?
Oh yeah, it's amazing. Yeah.
And so, and that's actually what I did with Noelle yesterday.
Yeah.
So let me talk a little bit about this piece, because I think this is such a huge piece.
Yeah.
And I think it's a big piece in the horse world too, is that there is a lot of talk about resistance, like in therapy schools. And people don't know me, maybe, but I've taught on a university level for 34, 35 years at a couple different universities. And a lot of what I taught is development and attachment, and have put together a whole bunch of theoretical stuff on that. What I see in therapy school and what I hear in the horse world is that there's this projection that the other being, whether it be a horse or whether it be a person, is resistant. And my perspective of that is that resistance doesn't exist. That when a horse is behaving in a certain way, they're working on protecting themselves. When we as beings are behaving in certain ways, we're protecting ourselves. So if I can change the perspective of resistance into protection, then what I can do is come and stand next to somebody and help protect them.
Let them feel safe.
Yeah, and help them feel safe. And most of the time when someone says this horse or this person is being resistant, it's because they don't know what to do.
Right.
And they're blaming it on the horse or their client. And that's not a fair thing to do.
Right.
And that's actually what happened when you and I were working together with Noelle and G, and that's literally what I did. And just so a little background, Noelle was working with one of her horses in Ronpan, and you were beginning to work with her. It was really right at the beginning of the session.
Yeah.
And what I saw was that Noelle was being, it looked like it could be labeled as deflection. It could be labeled as I don't want to be here. It could be labeled as some level of resistance. From my perspective, when I was watching what Noelle was doing, I was going, this woman, for good reason, is protecting herself. So let me step in and help her do that.
And I think it was too stimulated because we started that and then we had a conversation. Somehow it came up where we were talking. There was an opinion from a friend.
Yes.
And they started chatting. And then that brought up a real tension, and then maybe we can talk a little bit about the difference between resistance and tension, but it brought something up for her. And then I could just see that's when all of a sudden there was a shift in you, and you could, and that's, and I feel like that's where it really made sense for you to step in that moment.
And what was happening, and actually what's interesting about this is that they're two very, very good friends and who are totally on the same page of trying to help each other and trying to help horses. Yeah, there was some protection coming up, but it could have been called resistant. In fact, I even think that at one point, Noelle said, I feel like I have to defend myself.
Right.
And it was like, oh, okay.
Story started coming up.
Yeah. And you and I have talked a lot about people going up into that sympathetic part of their nervous system. And it was like, okay, well, instead of getting to that place where Noelle had to protect herself, or where before Noelle was, and this is a huge piece that you and I've talked about, and I'd love you to explain sort of your perspective on this, because I think it's really good. It's like an addition to some of what's out there, is that instead of Noelle going to that place of fight or flight, what I was attempting to do was, let's help you get to a place where you're protected and you can mobilize energy.
Right.
That was my attempt.
A level of empowerment.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, when we can. Yes.
You gave her a new process.
Yes. You use the word empowerment a lot. I'd like to share right now my definition of power.
Sure.
And there's a difference, and this fits right into what we're talking about. Control is that thing that we do when we don't trust.
Right.
Power is the ability to influence and be influenced in contact, in relationship.
Cool. Right.
And that's what was missing.
Right. You could just see that there was a way that she had learned to adapt to protect herself.
Yes.
And then it's amazing how all we need is these little triggers. And we see this with horses too, is we have these triggers that just our body subconsciously goes into that protective mechanism.
Yes.
And as soon as we're there, that's where the appearance of resistance comes. And I love how you see that, because what you're doing is you're seeing the appearance of resistance as the expression of work needing to be done, not necessarily a problematic. It's not like there's a problem in that the horse isn't willing to do the work, or they're being bad. It's that's starting to tell a story. And I love it when we do this with people, because I talk a lot about perspective in my work, is that if we can transform our perspective of how we see something, it moves your energy differently. So if I recognize that a horse has a behavior and I see that as the horse being disrespectful or trying to be bad, all of a sudden my charge is entirely different in how I'm going to address my horse. I'm going to use pressure in a negative way. I'm going to build boundaries
Yeah.
in myself. I'm not going to make myself vulnerable. But if I see the horse as there's a need that's not being met, the horse is telling me how they've learned how to adapt in life. And if I want to get them to a place where they can be in relationship, then I have to help understand how they can meet that need in a more relational way so they can become open again. And that's really what you did with Noelle.
That's exactly what I did with Noel. And all I did was, and so that people know, or at least can maybe picture this a little bit, all I did was stand next to Noelle and help her ground by sharing my nervous system with her and let her go through her process of moving energy and stomping and wiggling and shaking and Noelle is an incredibly expressive woman in the world. And what I asked her to do was make contact with her friend. And that was really hard.
Because that's a really neat part, because that contact, especially with eyes, that's the one thing that I've noticed with humans. And there's a lot of talk of that in the horse world where you don't make eye contact. And I've always wrestled with that because I feel like the eyes are such a soul connector. So what happens is way more energy moves through eyes, and it brings truth really fast because it just lets you be seen. It also lets something see you.
Yes.
So what I try to think about with eyes for myself with horses is that the more contact you make, the more you're going to be felt. So that means the more authentically you can show up, which is what I watched you do with Noelle, is that you stood there very open, like almost like you were, not like you were working at it, but you were just clearly letting her feel your space, which created safety for her. And I feel that with horses, because one of the things that people will do, which is a big reason they find resistance or they find a block with their horses, is that they walk into the horse, they feel the horse's space. And as soon as they feel the space, they recede and they shrink and they go into a protective mechanism.
Right.
Because most of the time, as people feel contact, that triggers our self-preservation. So these are unknown habits that we have with our horses that actually cause shrinking. And part of the work creates more availability in our space so we can show up and be felt or be seen or feel. And all of these things are heartbeats to relationship.
Completely.
So what you did is you stood close enough to her that
she could feel
she could just feel your energy.
And I didn't even have to tell her to do something.
Right. And I think that was a cool part, because I think we shared a little bit earlier that there's times with people in clinics where I'll step right in beside them and I'll put my hand on their back or hold onto their shirt so I can kind of move them around a little bit. And I didn't even really think of it that way. But a lot what you're doing is you're allowing them to feel the feel you have in the way you're making movements. And what you did is you allowed her to feel you enough that she could feel safe. I think safety was a big piece, but also a pathway for what you were saying. You were also giving her a feeling. And it's just really neat because, again, I think, all this, you were saying earlier that we have this challenge for words. And I think that's why what I call the universal language. It's like this language that's happening in the space, and it's vibrant and full and fulfilling and deep. But for some reason, we don't have words for it. But I think it's because it embodies so much.
When it comes from our inside out instead of our outside in,
right. Words don't always honor it.
The words aren't always there.
Yeah.
And your point about eyes is a really big deal because, and I would like to share a piece around what you did with G and his eyes. G is one of Noelle's horses. Is our eyes have a direct connection to our vagal nerve. And it's, other than our hearing, at least to the best of my knowledge, our eyes are the most direct connection to our ventral vagal nerve and ventral vagal process that we have. And I mean, I don't know who said this quote, but it's been around like as long as I've known, is that our eyes are the windows to our soul. I think that's the same thing that happens with horses. And so true eye contact, and I'm not talking about staring somebody down. I'm talking about true eye contact where it's like, Yeah,
letting yourself be seen.
letting yourself
Yeah,
be seen
yeah.
and allowing yourself to see another,
Mm.
and it's actually what Martin Buber calls the I thou relationship.
Huh.
And what we've done in our work is add I thou we,
Mm.
where we is it depicts the relationship. So the idea of eye contact with another being, to me, is huge. What I like, and I mean, just watching you yesterday with loading G, and so the audience knows that you're working on loading one of the horses into a trailer. And it was a new trailer and a new situation, so G struggled a little bit. What was so fascinating was you watching his eyes.
Right.
Just like I would probably watch the eyes of a person client that I was working with. And your ability to go, well, his eyes are in the trailer. Well, now they're neutral. Well, his eyes are out of the trailer. It was like, that was really amazing and very fascinating. It was like, oh, I've seen that before. I just haven't worked with it that way before.
Right.
So thank you for teaching me that.
Well, and what I thought was really cool is watching you work with Noelle, and you brought to light what was going on. And because there was an emotion in the universal space, you could feel when that conversation started with Noelle and her friend that there was a tension, there was something in the space, there was a thing, and you brought light to it. And then as soon as that light came to it, Noelle actually couldn't make eye contact. And that was a cool thing. And I think that's her story to tell, and we'll let you and her visit on that more. But that was really neat, because when she got to a place where she started to have the ability to release what was going on, it took her a process to do that. The eye contact she made was so rich in its feeling. And that richness is, to me, the very thing I'm looking for at the center of the relationship with my horses.
Absolutely.
And I feel like it's the same, because it's actually intimacy. And I feel like that's probably why it leads me a little bit into trainers and students and horses in the conversation, because there's something about horses that we love so much, but it's because there's something within us that all desires that depth of relationship. We love being in deep relationships. I think we were made for that. And horses seem to just create that opportunity. And because they don't have so many other things going on inside them, when they feel good, they just release the space, and we can just go inside that. And I think that is the gateway for good therapy. It also needs to be our guidance in training. Totally. Is that when our horses are not in a resonant place, it needs, and I think that's the reason, maybe jumping around here a little bit, but
no, you're fine. This is good.
It's the reason why I like the word empowerment, because the tell of development is that we can use the work and then go into relationships and be able to do things together that used to restrict us. The horse world, for me, it's interesting to watch. You see enough go on, and there was a time when most of what was happening in the horse world would be more dominance based, and it was post-war, just trying not to die, just making things happen. And I get it. And then we started feeling ourselves more and recognizing that maybe we didn't want to have that with our horses. And there's this big swing towards deepened relationships, and I just love that. I think that's great. And I think that it's really important to be able to take the things that we're learning and continue to bring them back into doing things together, because the real growth is the beauty. I think it's the reason why we test ourselves to doing things. You were telling me about an adventure you're possibly going to take in the near future. And the reason we do that is because we want to go into ourselves more. And there's such fulfillment about being able to go and do something hard and realize that we can do it.
Yes.
And I think that's the desire we have in relationships as well, which is why I can't let go of doing hard things together, because the fulfillment is, if we can help our horses regulate, we can get them to a place where things are no longer causing them to go into self-preservation, which is exactly what I desire with the relationship with my wife.
Totally.
But then we can use those skills, and the old challenges that used to push on us, we can go into them with a new mindset. So it's such a beautiful, I guess, a synergy again of the work we're trying to do, because instead of bumping up against stuff and going into self-preservation, we now have a capacity to look with new eyes And actually what my goal is in training is that where because the horses need to look to something, to feel something, to be led. And I feel like leadership is not about making something do things,
No.
but that it feels safe in the presence of a space to make themselves vulnerable to something new. And that's kind of what I look for with horses.
And to create a safe attachment so that we can walk together. So when Noelle and her friend were talking, part of what was creating the tension was it was really clear to me that both of them wanted to preserve their relationship.
All right.
And they didn't quite know how to do that, because it would have been easy for one or the other of them just to go and blow out of there.
So the tension came because they want relationship.
The tension came because they wanted the relationship. They didn't know quite how to pull it off.
Right.
And they didn't know how to speak to it with a level of integrity. Now, I'm not saying either of the people lack integrity. They had just hit an impasse.
Right.
And so all I did was come in and help there be enough settling and enough guidance and enough safety to be able to speak their truth in a very clean, simple way in contact and relationship. And when that happened, and this is the coolest part, when that happened between Noelle and her friend, what was happening with her horse was that he came in and joined the party.
Right.
And was unbelievably calm, unbelievably present, and incredibly supportive. And so, and there is a lot, and I mean, you pointed this out, is that sometimes her horse will come up and like nudge her and
he'll bump her.
Yeah.
Actually bump.
Yeah. And say, like, where are you? Like, here I am, here I am. He was not doing that at all.
Right.
And he was pretty close to me. And there's times where I don't want a horse quite that close, but because of his energy and because of his presence, not only was it incredibly safe, it was incredibly empowering, and incredibly supportive and kind.
It was like he was helping the process.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And that's that intuitive part that I think horses bring. So when we were talking about why horses, that's one of the reasons.
Right.
And what was really cool was when Noelle got really grounded in what was happening for her, and she had spoken incredibly clearly to her friend, and all she needed to say is, and this is what I help guide her to say, is, I love you and we have different opinions.
Right.
And that was it. That was it. And her friend said, yeah, we do. And that's totally fine. I mean, they were done.
Right.
But then that allowed Noelle to connect with her horse.
And what I saw is that released the tension in Noelle.
Yes.
Because the tension, and this is kind of something that I've observed with people, and this is another piece of the puzzle I want to chat about. But so I've worked with Noelle before, and I've watched her move her horses, and I've watched her ask questions. And the cool part about that was that tension for me, and I just see this and feel this, I don't come at it from your lens. I see it from a very maybe somatic place, a very organic place, is that when things come up for people, it's almost as if you observe where their energy is stored with some negative experience that's happened in their life.
Yes.
So you can feel that something's off. And we felt that as soon as the conversation started, you could feel something. But what was really cool, so the beginning of that, when that was happening, G came up and started bumping Noelle.
Oh, that's right. Yeah.
Which is where a lot of times people would say that horse is being disrespectful. But I think this illuminates this other piece of horses, is that for him, he felt Noelle go within herself and disappear from the space. So her energy went in, but also some of her energy that she has to just be who she is was consumed in that belief.
Yes.
So the experience of whatever got that belief system was also consuming part of her energy source. So that was the neat part when you finished, because after, you could just feel in her, she was more liberated. She was standing in her skin, in her feet, and her
she
carriage
looked completely
was different.
different. It wasn't even like the same person was there.
So then when And so then for me, the cool part about that, and that's where I just thought it was so neat how we could go back and forth off each other, because I felt that that was a really important moment for her to activate that into the doing again. So then what she did is she utilized that and was able to then ask G to respond. So then she just asked him to move off. And the amount of space and energy that she had now available to herself, it was probably the easiest she's ever been able to experience, just asking. And I think that's part of it. And I would, look to you on that side too. As soon as something's liberated, it also needs guidance and direction.
Totally.
And I see that as such a beautiful back and forth, because you liberated it and then I guided it. And I think that all of a sudden, when a person feels like they have access to that energy and then they use it, it almost creates it's like a little energy bomb, like just this excitement of what, instead of that energy going into that problem or that scenario, it went into the liberation of relationship,
completely,
communication. And that was so cool.
And there was no tension.
Right.
And what I would propose is that a lot of the tension that happens between us and our horses is the same thing that happened between Noelle and her friend. Is there's a deep desire to preserve the relationship,
right,
and which causes tension, versus being able, and what I would say is that tension creates an impasse.
Right. And I see that with people and their horses.
Yes, we get stuck.
Yeah.
So that release of tension, or that grounding that Noelle was able to do, actually unstuck or released the tension so that there could be fluidity,
right,
which was then transferred to what happened with Noelle and her horse.
Right.
And actually, when Noelle did that piece that you asked her to do, not only, it was like Noelle was like this beautiful ballet dancer.
Right. Yeah.
And so was her horse. His movement had changed dramatically from the movement before, because he was moving, but there was tension in his body, you could see.
Yeah. Right. Well, because he couldn't feel her.
Right.
And now he could.
Yes. And so, exactly. So then when he felt that and he moved, he was like a ballet dancer. It was like, oh, look at that. It's like so beautiful.
Hey guys, I've got Lady and Galano loaded up here, and we're just pulling out of the driveway on to our next leg of the trip. If you've been following us, you know this trip doesn't just test the miles. It tests what we're made of. When you travel with horses, everything matters. Their safety and their comfort is also your own peace of mind. That's why I've counted on Logan Coach trailers for this adventure of a lifetime. They're not just trailers. They're designed to handle life with horses, where things can change in a second. My Mare Lady has always been a discerning traveler, but the quiet interior of our Logan has kept her relaxed. The Sure Grip flooring has boosted her trailering confidence by giving her traction, providing cushioning, and keeping the floor dry. If this road trip has taught me anything, it is that the destination is not what matters. It's about how you get there. And that's why I haul with Logan. Whether it's your first time trailering or you are embarking on a year-long trip across the country, Logan Coach Trailers takes the stress out of the journey. They're horse trailers built for today's rider and every mile ahead. Visit logancoach.com to see the difference for yourself.
That is honestly where in training, I've always struggled with a technique-based approach, because it's not that learning techniques are bad, but if a technique would be that I do something on my outsides and I'm prioritizing what the horse does on their outsides, hoping for an internal change. That's how I would look at that.
Right.
Where an energy change will guide the body. So as I move my energy, I am presenting my feelings into the space, my whatever the thing is that I want, and I'm practicing it. And that again is part of the universal language, is that I allow myself to be felt.
Yes.
And I think that's where the challenge comes for people, because allowing yourself to be felt, that's a vulnerable
we have
place.
to trust.
Oh, we have to trust the space.
Right.
I have to have a certain level of awareness within myself. But I think the beauty of it is then the very thing that G wanted when he was bumping her was that he lost her
Mhm.
when that moment came and she went inside herself. And then when she came back to the space, he could feel her, which is the very thing relationships want, is to feel each other
all
deeply.
relationships, yes.
All relate. And there it is, universal again.
Yes.
And when she returned back to the space, G and Lady on the outside of the pen too, they just dropped into almost this trance because
Yeah.
that, and it's like the horses say, there it is.
Yep, there it
And
is.
what a cool thing. We chatted about the difference between animals and how horses somehow care to do this, but dogs like us too much to show us our holes, and cats don't care enough about us to show us our
You
holes.
might rile up a few dog and cat people, but
Maybe so, but horses seem to really, they give you feedback almost instantaneously around what you shifted. And I feel like what a beautiful blessing for us on the therapy side and the training side, if we listen to it and we don't take it as behavior, but we take it as information to help
Yes.
us deepen our relationships.
And one of the pieces, and people ask me this a lot because I've been in the therapy world for so long, is that what's the difference between there's a lot of out there with animal assisted therapy, and what's the difference between working with horses and dogs and cats, etc. Dogs and cats are actually predatorial. That's how they live.
All right, good.
And rightfully so.
Yeah.
I mean, that's how they're designed. But that's a different energy,
Right.
than the whole concept of being prey. And I don't want to like overemphasize, oh, horses are prey. So
Sure.
But in the wild they are.
Yeah.
And that's a part of who they are and what they've carried for I don't know how many hundreds of thousands of years. And so, and it's a different energy. The way that I would put it, and I'm talking right now around a little bit stereotypic.
Sure.
Where a predator energy is invasive, and a prey energy is more of an accepting energy, because we have to accept that and move.
Right.
We're leaving, we're running, we're not, there's no stalking. Horses
Right.
don't stalk. A dog or a cat will.
Right.
Again, we need both on some levels. I think us as humans often get a choice between those things, which is probably one of the unique things about us.
Right.
But it's a different underlying foundational energy, where horses, their survival depends on relationship, and dogs and cats, their survival doesn't always necessarily depend on relationship.
Right.
In
Yeah,
the,
really
in the
good.
wild.
Yeah.
And again, someone could come in and say, well, what about wolves? And it's like, yeah, wolves have incredible relationship
They do.
process going on. So again, I'm talking general and a bit stereotypic, just as a bit of a teaching piece.
100%. Yeah. There's always the edges and the fringes and the
Completely.
basic ideas for almost any topic. Just brings my mind to the responsibility of the teacher. And I know for a lot of people listening, we've gone through a lot of teaching that has possibly been impacting to our soul in a very negative way. And I've thought of this a lot, of why the relationships around us and our horse can cause a lot of wounding in how we're taught. And there's a lot of people who would share the idea that they remember exactly the shirt color they were wearing, or what was going on in the moment that somebody said something to them in a certain way. And for me, it really does play into how open we become in relationship. And that might be why we can get wounded more with our spouse or our partner, because we've opened ourselves more intimately to the space. And therefore, when things are said, when you're more open, you take things a lot deeper. And I feel like, just as we're learning more about, how open we are, how we store things, there's a real responsibility, I think, as instructors and teachers, as we put ourselves into a position where we're going to administer an antidote, so to speak, to a horse and a rider, that we are aware that we are accepting people that are soulfully open. So the responsibility is more intense. It has
totally
a
agree.
deeper impact, and I think there needs to be an awareness of the responsibility, because it is not simply just getting them to do techniques or ride a pattern or compete a certain course. That you are taking people in that are in a very, maybe not fragile, but open state because of their love for their horses. And I feel like there needs to be a consideration for that in the process, because what you stepped into with Noelle and her horse is the same openness that instructors step into, but from a different perspective. You know, you came in as a therapist with something to offer that moment, but I think there's a level of openness that, as I watched you step in there with Noelle, that I feel like instructors really need to be mindful of the responsibility that you are handling the hearts of people and horses that are open. And that creates a certain level of consideration for us that I think we need to really stay mindful of.
Thank you for saying that. One of the things I think that happens in the horse world is I think instructors oftentimes get put in an incredible double bind. And because of what you just brought up, when we sit on a horse, and I want to give credit to
Soul.
Yeah, to Soul.
Yeah.
Because she's the one that mentioned this. I've put that together in different words, but this came directly from Soul, is that we're literally sitting above a horse's heart, our horse's heart, and that energy is coming up through our pelvis, through our perineum and our pelvis into our hearts. So what I've spoken about many times is all energy, our pelvises are the grand central station for our energy. But when our pelvises move, energy moves through us. Any energy that gets grounded goes through our pelvis. Any energy that comes from the ground up to our bodies comes through our pelvis. And our pelvises are where life begins with humans. And when our pelvises get moved, because when we ride a horse, our pelvises are moved when we allow it, when we're riding. This is one of the pieces we work on. In connection. Our pelvises are moving and being rocked with every step a horse takes. As a brief aside, in the attachment work that I do, when somebody is riding a horse, it's the closest that I can come in working with somebody to have a person be moved the same way they were moved in utero.
Right. You're totally released to the other being, kind of.
Totally released to the other being. And a horse's pelvis is exactly like a human pelvis. And I've said this numbers of other times, if you watch a woman who, and I mean this with total love and respect, just so everybody knows, is if you watch a woman walk who is 7-8 months pregnant and you watch a horse walk, the movement of their pelvises are very, very similar, if not exactly alike. So when we have attachment issues, if I can work with somebody and go back to that, which the only way that I know how to do that, one that's actually that authentic, it's not exact, but it's very close, and also incredibly ethical, is that it opens up. It opens up our pelvis and opens up our hearts, which then brings up all kinds of attachment stuff for the rider, and all kinds of past trauma stuff for the rider, and all kinds of relational stuff for the rider.
Just a heads up, the next part of this conversation contains explicit content in the context of therapy with people who have experienced sexual abuse. The insights offered could be helpful for some listeners, but the terminology may be triggering for others. If you would like to skip this section, jump ahead 2 minutes.
In clinics, the clinician is focused on how someone helps work with their horse.
Right.
But you use the word trigger, and that's a good word. Oftentimes I'll use trigger. I'll use energy moving. I'll use people. I've had people actually have memories of traumas and rape and et cetera, et cetera. I've also worked with people who have been sexually abused, where the first time their pelvis and genitals have been touched have been sitting on a horse since the abuse.
Wow.
And just sitting somebody on a horse, and it's like,
brings it all up.
Oh my gosh. So I think that clinicians do face a bit of a double bind, because they're not generally trained to be therapists. They're not generally trained in attachment work. They're not generally trained in trauma work. A lot of clinicians are becoming much more aware, and they're still not fully trained.
Right.
So that's the double bind.
Yeah.
And part of what I see in clinics is all kinds of stuff getting triggered for people.
Right.
And then what's interesting is in that, I don't know, that 8 to 10 and sometimes 20 people that are in a clinic, they're all triggered, or at least some of them are, and then they get off their horses in the evening and all this stuff is all stirred up, and it's like there's all kinds of stuff happening or not happening relationally between the participants of the clinic.
Yeah.
So clinicians didn't go into this work to become therapists.
Right.
Although that's a part of it.
Right.
And then, people have to make the choice of, like, do I even touch into that? Do I become aware of that? Do I do a little bit of it? Do I, is it over my head? Do I have a therapist waiting in the wings? And that was one of the beautiful pieces of our work together yesterday, because I'd say I'm a decent horseman, but I'm not your level. I'm not your level of a teacher, of a clinician on that level. I'm not there. Can I go do well riding my horse? And can I go out even alone? Can I do pack trips? Can I do those things? Yeah, I can do those things, but I'm not you.
Same the other way.
Yeah, exactly. And it's like, so what I would love is some connection, some working together on this piece. Because that's what happened yesterday. And it was so, there was so much fluidity to it, so much respect, so much, lovely communication between us. Like, what are you seeing here, Josh? And you're like, boom, 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 boom.
Yeah.
And you're going, what are you seeing here, Dewey? And so I think that this is a piece that could be really helpful to the horse world. Could also be unbelievably helpful to the horses that we work with. To our horses that we work with, not but our horses. Because when I go into a clinic, I have 3 horses. The horse I mainly ride is my most athletic and most sound horse. I have another horse that's an elder horse, and I have a pony. So I don't ride those 2 horses in clinics. But the bottom line piece is that the horses, even when I have ridden my elder horse when he was younger, I've ridden him in clinics. And they're beings that I'm in love with. And people love their horses. So, and a lot of times there's so much connection with a horse that people don't even know how to even speak about connection with other humans. There are many people that go, I'm good with horses.
Right.
I don't know if I can stand to be around people. So then all that gets exacerbated.
Yeah. I would love to share from the other side of the fence.
I'd love that.
Being a clinician and teaching and training and, trying to hold space for people. So I'll just because I do experience this, and we do live in a culture right now where when we're training and you start to do well as a trainer or a teacher, people will look up to you and they will feel safer in your presence. So they open up more. And we already talked about horses open people more. And this creates a certain responsibility for us to very easily step into areas where we aren't qualified. And I would probably say as the years have gone on, there's been moments probably where I maybe did try to hold space for people in ways that I wasn't qualified. And I think that the reason it comes is just because I love people and I want to hold space. And where I've slowly come, and obviously I'm always trying to get better at this. And, this is balance. I don't think balance is a straight line. Balance is as you bump back and forth, and that's no different with horses or people. If we decide we need to be right here, we'll always be disappointed because it is a back and forth process. But what I've come to, and just to maybe encourage clinicians or teachers in this, is that so we've opened up this responsibility that you now have, that you're not just dealing with people and getting them to do stuff and you opening up the whole idea of the pelvis. So now there's another layer of responsibility that as people are moving on horses, there's another level of them opening. So that does create more responsibility for instructors. And I've kind of looked at it in a couple different levels. So the first is that people are generally not used to being loved. They're not used to being in a space where they're just accepted. And I feel like that's been, as a teacher, maybe one of my powerful pieces, because as I've done enough work in myself, I feel like the two effects of doing work within yourself is the reflections of gratitude and love. As you do more work, there's just a gratitude for life. But there's also now more openness for us to be able to actually love what we're doing and love each other because we're able to just be present. And I find that that's probably one of the biggest pieces as we're holding space for people is just to, and it doesn't mean you have to love the person, but to be in a place where you can accept them and you can allow them. You're loving. Right. And if you can allow them the process and recognize that as you open these things, just to be mindful that holding space and just being present as you're trying to teach them is a great place. And I think that that's what I would say I believe most teachers should be, because when we know that people are open and raw and vulnerable because they're riding in front of us. Already they're riding in front of us. They're exposing what they can do. And that's already hard for people. So to be able to accept that and to know what that's like. And I feel like that partly comes as trainers stay also being taught. This is important because I always remember what it's like to keep putting myself out there. So I'm not always just looking seemingly down from my high platform on others.
Right, exactly.
And if we can just have that sense of awareness that people are putting themselves into vulnerable positions, that in itself is hard. They're now open because they're on their horse. And this new illumination for me around the pelvis and around the energy and how that triggers so many things. Again, another sense for us as trainers, just to be kind and loving and recognize that it's not just technique and riding horses. And the conclusive piece for me around this is because in my work, we do a lot with energy. We're doing a lot with a person's capacity to channel energy, to target what's going on in and around them. And what I find for myself is that where I now bump up against the ceiling of where I feel capable is if I ask questions and there is a capacity for people to move energy and expand and play, we can really work inside that. But on areas where I feel like it's void, there's nothing there, the person is not capable. The most important piece is to recognize that doesn't mean that they're incompetent. It doesn't mean that they're incapable. It just means we're starting to touch stuff that's outside of our wheelhouse. And that's kind of how I feel. So that is where, if I were to have asked Noelle in that moment, after she was triggered by that scenario, to now go and move her horse, it would have been either he would have not done it, or he would have physically had to move off her aids alone because she was not available. So I feel like as trainers and clinicians and, people trying to help others is for us to stay mindful of when you really feel a person unable and restricted. I think we need a little more dialogue around, not in a negative way, because I think there's, especially in the cowboy culture, we're really trying to change the tone of that getting help is a strength. it's a
Absolutely.
strength. It's not a weakness, you know. And to say that if there's a spot where people need to be able to step in and unlock themselves and work into that's really important. I think the challenge is the languaging around that and the way we can move through those spaces. But I think it really needs to become clear that we don't try to step into that too much as clinicians or teachers, because again, you're right, we're not qualified. But holding space, it's a powerful impact I found, because most people are just not used to someone just being there with them and genuinely
True.
being present, you know. And I know you did that with Noelle. That was part of what opened her up.
Mhm.
And I find that's one of my pieces of work, is just, I'm here. I might not have the answers for you, but I'm not rejecting you. I'm not judging you.
Right.
And I'm just going to be here with you, you know. And a lot of times what'll happen is, as a person opens energetically, there's going to be something that happens. It might be, a lot of times there's tears, you know, and
Mhm.
to then guide that, if that can turn into empowerment and they can feel like they can move that energy, I feel like I'm on the right track. But if it bumps up against a certain level of resistance, we need to be able to be clearer about being able to get the help we need. So I'm curious, you know, this is me just kind of laying out what I do. I would love to get your feedback on how you feel about that.
Well, the holding space piece is incredibly, incredibly powerful. And in all honesty, that's probably half of therapy.
Right.
There's a couple of other pieces that I think happen, is when one is exactly what you spoke about, around people getting triggered, people having feelings, people having memories, all of those things when they're working with their horses. And oftentimes we end up working with two different levels of that.
Right.
One is the attachment piece, another is the trauma piece. So holding space can be really, really powerful. And I've experienced that in my life. I mean, people don't know. I mean, the reason I know so much about attachment is because I had to deal with that.
Right.
My mother had tuberculosis when I was born, actually before I was born, and I was born and whisked away and didn't live with her until I was 18 months old. So that created a bunch of stuff. Right. Which part of what that leads into for me is to say the attachment stuff is really big, and it doesn't. A lot of people think when there are attachment issues going on, it's because of abuse, and like about 85% of attachment issues don't come from abuse.
That's big.
And there's also trauma. Like in 2010, I came off a horse and busted my pelvis, and so I took a lot of work for me to get back on and ride, and every once in a while I still have a twinge or two. But I'm left with, certain kinds of injuries, like my feet are numb because I messed up some nerves and stuff like that. So there's all of those kind of things we're working with. The other level that we're working with is in clinics. And this is a piece that's a huge challenge, I think, is like you mentioned, you usually have 7-ish in your clinics, and then you also do some other, I think, bigger stuff you were talking about with the stuff in the spring and working cows and branding and all of those things. When we come together in groups, and let's say you have 7 or 8 or 10 or 12, and sometimes people have more, people all working on things, and you have 10 or 12 people that have all kinds of stuff come up, you're literally on some levels doing group therapy.
Right.
And that I've never seen that addressed in a clinic.
I think you have the opportunity right now, Dewey, to really help clinicians. What can we as clinicians in that moment, not being in that space and not being able to go in there and drop in and do the work you're doing? We have people watching. We have a group of people around. We're in the arena, the round pen, whatever, teaching a person. And we have the right heart. We're trying to hold space and help these people grow. We want it to happen. And it happens that this person drops into a certain place. What would you How would you recommend that clinicians hold space
That
for
is
people in those
maybe
moments?
I've never had a clinician ask me that. So thank you.
Yeah, you're welcome. I'd love to know.
Well, here's how I see most clinics, and actually I've learned a lot in clinics this way, where the instructor is the hub,
Mm-hmm.
and there's sort of spokes going out to each person. But it's all individual.
Right.
It's like you're working with Joe, and then you're working with Mary, then you're working with Sally, then you're working with Steve, and then Alice.
Mm-hmm.
And well, part of what needs to happen, at least in my view, that would really be helpful. And I've not been in one of your clinics, so I don't know whether you do this or not. But in many of the clinics I've been in, and I've been in a lot of different clinics with a lot of different people, so I'm not talking about anyone in particular.
Mm-hmm. Right on.
Is for the clinician to actually speak to this. Like,
just create awareness
and invite people to support each other.
Right. You're creating a culture almost. You're creating
a different culture.
Right.
Because part of what people don't know, this is actually part of what I would teach. I taught in master's programs with people getting their master's degree to become therapists. So I call it therapy school.
Okay.
And is when we go into a group, no matter what group it is, if we have not done our work, we're going to project our family members onto that group.
Okay.
And we're going to assume, and this is a somatic process, we're going to assume that our place in that group is the same place we had in our family.
Okay.
And most people don't know that, but that's what happens. And every group member does that.
Right.
So we've just opened people up. We've just done, maybe some people even do some stretching and even some yoga before certain parts of clinics, and some breath work sometimes. People do meetings, and then people get on their horses and all kinds of stuff opens up. Right. But a leader of a clinic, if a leader said, these are possibly things that can happen.
Right.
You most likely will be opened up on some levels. You may feel raw. You may feel vulnerable. Do what you can do. Make some contact with every member of the group. You know, if it's a multiple day clinic, make some contact with each member of the group and support each other. Make some contact and have meals together.
Yeah. Okay.
You know that you're going to be vulnerable and open. And that's what's going to be going on most likely for a number, if not all of you, and more facilitating and just giving that permission, giving that awareness of allow yourselves to get each other's back.
This is really good, because I feel like in the space, I kind of touch it, but I feel like I'm really excited to test this a little more, that I could probably add quite a bit to this, because a lot of times what I'll do is I will jokingly say that, you know, if a person is maybe a little critical or not supportive, they probably won't spend much time here because this environment is trying to be a place. So I kind of joke around about it, just try to keep it light, but also let people know that I'm let's say the word protective, because I feel like maybe that is true, but I am protective of the environment.
Totally.
When people create vulnerability, that I will protect the space so it's safe. And I will try to connect with people, but I think it's more passive, just because I want to connect rather than trying to set that environment. So I'm thank you for that, because I would like to act on that and just see how much more I can establish the environment, because isn't it true? How often, I will say this is something I do say, is that when people come in a clinic, the pressure is not on you. The pressure is on me.
Exactly.
I don't know. And I think maybe it is because
I'm not sure people really
grasp
I'm
that.
glad you say that.
Yeah.
Because it's true.
Yeah.
And still, when I've been in clinics, I put a fair amount of pressure on
Sure.
myself.
Well, and a lot of times we feel the pressure on us because we maybe feel silly or dumb if we're not getting things. And depending on how the instructor handles us, boy, we can compound that belief system.
Totally.
But I do feel like if I'm coming in there as the professional, the pressure is on me. As the student comes in, the student's responsibility would just to stay open to what I'm trying to say to them. You know, that I would
Mhm.
desire that they would do their best to take the information and ask questions when you need. But the pressure's on me. And so I feel like in subtle ways, I would say maybe I'm kind of close to that. But boy, when you open up and say something, when you look at someone and you tell them that, oh, it softens it. So I'm really
Completely.
curious. I'm really curious to take a little bit more active, a more active role on that. And I think also there's probably an element too of maybe even talking about, you know, if you really feel blocked on something, because I would really share for myself, you know, that any of the work I've gone and done personally, it's transformed my life. You know,
Totally.
it sets a tone for you to show that as strength and maybe to open that up to others in the beginning. So yeah, my mind's going, if you can see that.
Well, I love what you're saying and love that you're open to this. I mean, that's in this few days that we've spent together, it's one of the things I appreciate about you the most.
Okay.
When me and 4 other people, me, my partner Kimberly, and then 3 other instructors, run the Gestalt Equine-Assisted of the Rockies. Basically what that program is teaching therapists to do equine-assisted therapy from a Gestalt perspective. Interestingly enough, what we do, we do our work in intensives. It's 4-day intensives. We just finished one, and we have up to 30 people. We spend a lot of time talking about we're in this together. People are going to get triggered. People are going to judge themselves. People may even judge each other. People are going to project on each other. People are going to think that if I say X to one person and Y to another person, that I like one person better than the other.
Right.
We say all of those, we lay all that on the table and say, this is a possibility of this happening. Let's do our best to help that not happen.
Right.
And let's do our best to support each other. And what we actually ask people to do is to go around and make an agreement that in one way or another, it's like, I got your back.
Right.
For every person in the group. And when we're saying that, I got your back, I got your back, that changes everything.
Right.
And at the end of most of our intensives, well, at the end of all of them, we have people going, this was great, I felt supportive, and we do, I mean, it's therapeutic what we do, but we're also doing all kinds of stuff with horses because for someone to do equine-assisted therapy, the better of a horse person they are, the better of a therapist they're going to be. And people will be doing the exact same thing. Like literally the round pen we worked in yesterday was the exact same round pen that we had students working in, working on energetically moving horses. So, and people judge the living daylights out of themselves. Well, you did it like Joe did it better than Mary did it. And it's like, oh, that's not what we're here for. But that's what we do.
Yeah, right.
And if we've had comparisons in our family, and those judgments, which most people have, and we transfer that to this group that we're in, it's powerful stuff.
Right.
And if we as leaders can say, this may be something that comes up. This may be something that happens. This may be something that you will judge yourself. This may be something where you'll look at another person and compare yourself.
Right.
And and I've even had people say, my horse isn't as pretty as your horse. And I mean, those, because we're so attached in one way, and your horse is better than mine. I mean, that stuff is so powerful, and it's all unspoken.
Yeah.
And the more that we can speak to, I mean, even one of the things I went home and said to Kimberly is how much I appreciated your openness and and what we could talk about without judgment.
Right.
And that's a really big piece.
Mm-hmm.
And I think there are a lot of clinicians that don't have judgment, and they're pretty good.
Yeah.
What's not happening is, and then some clinicians, and I would say probably all clinicians, just because they're human, they have judgments once in a while.
Sure.
Just like me. I mean, I do my best, and I don't always pull it off. Is that, but if we can speak about all of that stuff openly and put it on the table and not hide it,
right,
and it changes everything.
I think the thing it's done for me is that it just makes me not feel weird, because
Exactly.
when you say that, it's like, oh, there's other people that feel that way, or there's other people that think that. And so I know, just as you're saying that, that would be what it would do for the group. And I think now that's what puts us all together.
Exactly.
Because now we're recognizing that, yeah, we are kind of all in the same boat, and other people have those questions. And I'll often say that is that, if you have a question, there's a really good chance someone else does too. And if you're brave enough to ask the question, you're probably going to actually help people. So instead of putting it on them that they might look silly for asking it, they're actually being brave. It just changes the narrative.
Yep.
Thank you so much for that. I hope that that's going to help a ton of people, because it's sure going to help me. I'm so excited to put some of those things to the test.
Well, I would love to be in a clinic where someone said that.
Yeah, right.
Because I lead so much. Having someone say that
right on
would relieve me from that.
Yeah.
And let me just be there and just be
right. Yeah.
Some guy that's in a clinic that
Right.
loves his horse and is trying to learn.
You just get to show up.
Yeah.
And be received.
Yes.
I think the future is exciting, because I'm really excited to do possibly some work with you and supporting people. I think the one thing that I've learned is that you as a therapist are primarily speaking through the universal space. You're listening and feeling. I think that's why we've been able to work so well off each other.
I would completely agree with you.
It's just being able to feel. You can kind of feel, instead of, I find if a person is too technical, or maybe not insecure is the word, but
I'd say protocol.
Yeah, we're too rigid
Yeah,
to
the
the
word
things.
I use is protocol.
Right.
It's like,
Yeah, and then you
do
can't
these
actually
3 things and then you get this.
Right, and then you can't read off each other so well. So for me, that's super exciting. It makes me want to, and I know part of Noelle getting you and I together was that she felt that in both of us, and was really excited, because this is a big piece in the horse world, is how do we help hold space for people in this horse way, but not really. How do we be better humans together and grow and hold space for horse people? So I'm excited to see what that can do for you and I in the future.
Yeah.
Because I feel like there's a lot of skills, and I think some of it is really deep. There's going really deep with people, and there's also some things just like this where it's actually not really deep. It's just awareness.
Totally.
And if we could just go into it with new awarenesses, I think it has the capacity to change people's lives.
I do too. And one of the things that I think would be really cool is there's some stuff that I think both of us working together could teach that could help clinicians have more awareness.
Right.
And there's some really pretty straightforward, easy stuff to work with.
Right.
When we come from a really congruent place, which is where we began. That's where you began, and around working with horses, we need congruency too.
Right.
And that would be super helpful for clinicians to know. It would change a whole lot, because there's so many people, and Noelle and I've talked about this a lot, and I've talked to many other people. They go in, they're so excited to be in a clinic, and they leave feeling horrible.
Right.
Or they leave feeling like disappointed. I'm not saying clinicians are the cause of that. What I'm saying is because
there's a piece we're missing, maybe.
There's a piece missing, and the clinicians I've worked with really do care. They really do want to help people. They really do want to help their horses. They really do want to help the horse-human connection. I just think that there's some stuff that
Right.
would be helpful.
Fill in some of these blanks.
Yeah.
I think what it does is it ends up allowing the clinicians that do care to actually hold space in the right ways. Instead of maybe trying to go in and do the therapy, we're holding space in a way where holding space does the therapy that we can do. And then we allow the other side, which is having the information to go in there and do what you do, to actually have its power. And the exciting piece is, and I'm really looking forward to this. I really hope we can make this happen, is to put a group together and do what we did with Noel, and see what that is for people in their lives, to go back and forth like that. And now it also makes me think there's also room for us to be able to maybe talk with clinicians and maybe empower them, because I feel like it's interesting. When we started this conversation, I had a little bit more mindset around how do we help the people. But now I feel like my heart is going out towards the teachers, because there's a certain level of responsibility here, and they're trying their best. You know, teachers are really trying their best. And the challenge is when people become vulnerable, vulnerability also can open up vulnerability in me.
Completely.
So then teachers are also exposed on some level, but they're always supposed to be the ones as the authority. So then they need space help for them as well.
Right. Completely. Because I'm actually trying to think back, and because I've been doing this a long time, since the mid 90s.
Mm-hmm.
I don't know that I've ever come across a clinician that didn't, well, let me say it in a positive way. Every clinician that I've come across has had the best intentions. Right. I've not come across anybody that walks in and goes, I wonder how many people I can mess up today.
Right.
I've never seen that.
Yeah.
And I think that's really I think that's what the horse world is.
Mm-hmm.
Is the horse world, the people in the horse world really do want to do the best for themselves and their horses.
Mm-hmm.
And I think the students who come in
mm-hmm.
want to do their best.
Yeah.
And I think we can help make that happen. And I make the commitment to putting that together with you.
Yeah, me myself as well. It's so exciting to. I think I'm really more and more. You see the heart that Noel has in trying to bring people like ourselves together, and I feel like it's going to be exciting to see how we can keep that ball rolling.
Agreed.
Yeah, cool. Well, thank you so much, Duey, for taking the time to share with me. And man, what a blessing to just get to know you. I
would say exactly the same. Thank you for your time and what you bring. And my soul's enriched by you.
Yeah, I feel the same way. Thank you.
Thank you.